In October 1941, German Panzer divisions advanced towards the Soviet city of Mtsensk, confident in their armor's superiority. The terrain, heavy with autumn rains, saw the ground churn to mud. As the 4th Panzer Division surged forward with 87 tanks, the thunder of their approach masked a grim surprise. Soviet T-34 tanks, newly issued and largely untested in large formations, waited in concealed positions. When the first salvos rang out, German tank crews realized their rounds bounced off the angled T-34 armor as if it were stone. Panic rippled through German reports as a supposedly weak opponent absorbed everything the Panzers could throw at them. At that moment, the Wehrmacht's sense of invincibility met steel and mud and began to break. On October 6, 1941, Colonel Mikhail Kadukov's 1st Guards Tank Brigade took defensive positions along the eastern bank of the Zusha River, guarding the Orel-Tula Road near Mtsensk. Facing him was General Heinz Guderian's 4th Panzer Division. With 87 Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks supported by infantry from the 35th Infantry Division and over 70 German half-tracks. The Germans expected another rapid victory, believing their training and doctrine would overcome any Soviet armor. Yet, Soviet intelligence had intercepted documents showing German reliance on short-barreled 75mm guns and narrow tank tracks, which they believed would allow for quick maneuver and firepower even in muddy conditions. Kadukov's forces consisted of 42 T-34s, each armed with a 76.2mm F-34 gun and frontal armor, sloped at 45mm thick and 22 kV-1 heavy tanks, augmented by dug-in infantry and supporting batteries. German tactical reports from France and Poland offered no preparation for such a concentration of modern Soviet armor in this terrain. Cold rain had begun days earlier, flooding fields to nearly 30 centimeters deep. Soviet tanks, built with wide tracks for low ground pressure, exploited the conditions, while German panzers bogged down. Soviet crews, anticipating the attack, had established firing positions on high ground and in the woods surrounding the road. At 0630 hours, thick fog reduced visibility to 500 meters. By sunrise, the German columns moved forward unaware of the trap set before them. Shortly after 0700 hours, Panzer Battalion No. 35 under Major Hermann von Oppeln-Branikowski probed Soviet lines, advancing slowly through blackened mud. Initial artillery bursts from Kadukov's hidden tanks disabled several lead half-tracks. As the German Panzer III tanks tried to return fire, their 50mm rounds struck T-34s at 800 meters, but failed to penetrate the angled armor. Radio intercepts from battalion headquarters revealed mounting anxiety. German crews could not comprehend how their shots ricocheted harmlessly. At 0745 hours, Sergeant Ivan Stepanovich Konovalov of the Soviet Brigade reported a critical radio malfunction due to water-soaked wiring, causing a delay in target assignments and resulting in 2 Soviet tanks being knocked out by coordinated German fire. Despite that, the majority of T-34s maneuvered out of cover, pushing forward while the ground's viscosity slowed the panzers to under 12 kilometers per hour. At 0805 hours, Oberleutnant Dietrich Kraft intercepted further Soviet communications and signaled to General Guderian. The scale of enemy armor was greater than expected. Meanwhile, wider German formations fell under the fire of KV-1 tanks positioned behind the second line. By 0815 hours. 3 German half-tracks were destroyed and 2 more immobilized. Visibility improved slightly as sunlight began burning through the fog, yet it exposed the full weight of the Soviet counterfire. By 0900 hours, 43 German tanks remained operational, a startling 21% reduction in armor strength, forcing Guderian to reconsider his offensive and order an urgent tactical pause. At 0913 hours, Technical Lieutenant Vasily Volkov of the 1st Guards Tank Brigade's forward observation post recorded a series of abnormal shell impacts on T-34 No. 224, positioned southeast of the Orel-Tula Road. Using Soviets' panoramic periscope, Volkov and his crew observed that 7 consecutive armor-piercing rounds from German Panzer IV tanks failed to penetrate the T-34. S-45mm sloped frontal armor at distances ranging from 600 to 900 meters. Volkov, checking the impact marks with a thickness gauge, logged indentations averaging only 14 millimeters deep far, short of penetration values, anticipated from prior German engagements in Poland and France. 85 within 4 minutes, Volkov transmitted his findings via the Lend-Lease SCR 506 radio to Colonel Katukov's command post, highlighting the T-34's armor resilience and the ineffectiveness of the German KWK-37L 24-75mm and KWK-38 50mm guns under current conditions. Soviet expectations from spring test exercises had predicted a 30% penetration rate at such ranges. Now, the technical data revealed less than 5%. Operations Officer Major Nikitin relayed these results to tank commanders across 2 companies within 8 minutes. 80 on the Allied side, British military observers attached to the Soviet Northern Front, including Major Christopher Broom, received detailed transmission logs at the Moscow military attaché office by 0930 hours. The British immediately recognized that the T-34's armor and firepower combination enabled it to engage and destroy German tanks at distances beyond what current British and American models e.g. M3 Grant could survive. Reports from Broom contributed to directives for urgent study of Soviet tank design, while Soviet command ordered an immediate offensive, maneuver-diverting 13 T-34s and 6 KV-1s to encircle the enemy's right flank. 85 on the German side, Hauptmann Erich Schulz of the 4th Panzer Division radioed battalion command at 0919 hours, reporting, "Rounds ineffective, enemy armor impervious at 700 meters." German crews switched to close-range engagement, reducing standard spacing from 50 meters to 20 meters per vehicle. This tactical compression exposed units to Soviet artillery concentrations. Panzer platoons attempted to coordinate flanking attacks, but communication breakdowns plagued companies as 3 of 5 wireless sets failed due to water intrusion. By 935, command orders were sporadic and uncoordinated, further compounding confusion. 80 by 0940 hours, alarm over the T-34's armor resistance and communications malfunctions had spread across 3 battalions identified as 35th, 66th, and 79th of the German 4th Panzer Division. Tactical initiative shifted. Soviet units pushed across a 2.1 kilometer front, halting the German advance and reducing effective German tank strength from 43 to 29 within the next 11 minutes. Coordination between German tank, artillery, and infantry elements broke down, marking a decisive loss of momentum in Guderian's October push. 70, the Panzer IV OSV. F1, equipped with the KWK-37L 24-75mm gun, was designed to defeat 40mm armor at 500 meters using PZGR-34 armor-piercing shells. Its main optic, the TZF-5B, provided precise targeting out to 1,200 meters, and German armor plate was rated for 30mm resistance. However, the introduction of T-34 tanks with 45mm sloped frontal armor at 60 degrees resulted in effective thicknesses near 90mm. German testing at Kummersdorf proving grounds during early 1941 had not included trials against heavily sloped or hardened cast armor. As a result, no German gun below 7.5 centimeters PaK-40 could reliably penetrate the T-34. Additional factors included T-34's Christie suspension, providing high off-road speed, low ground pressure from 500mm wide tracks, 0.62 kg/cm2, and reliable V2 diesel engines, each conferring battlefield advantages absent from German models. 120, the decision by General Heinz Guderian to employ rapid, direct assault tactics, blitzkrieg, on October 6, 1941, at 0610 hours, relied on earlier intelligence assessments. OKH Report 11841. September 28 asserting Soviet tanks could be knocked out by coordinated 50mm fire at 400 meters. That report failed to consider the T T-34's new armor geometry and thicker hull. In contrast to France 1940, where German 37mm and short 75mm guns penetrated French Char B-1 tanks at 300 meters, here, Soviet armor was impenetrable at similar ranges. Wehrmacht Truppenführung doctrine called for close support by anti-tank guns and mobile artillery, but Mtsensk's flooded terrain and mud prevented the use of 7.5 centimeters PaK-40 guns, leaving Panzer units unsupported and exposed. 120 captured German after-action reports from Panzer Regiment 35 documented. Repeated 50mm direct hits had no effect on T-34 units. Radio communications partially lost due to water. Artillery unavailable due to mud. Guderian's October 12 review cited, "None of our currently fielded tanks can match the Russian T-34's mobility and armor." Post-war interrogation of Hauptmann Hans Feldmayer confirmed. Crews expended over 80% of available AP shells with no penetrations beyond 300 meters. Archival analysis revealed that at Mtsensk, German tanks achieved successful penetrations only 8% of the time, versus 67% during France 1940, a decrease of 59%. Soviet tank survivability at Mtsensk approached 75%, compared to 31% for French armor at Stan. Soviet technical archives further indicate an average T-34 knocked-out to engaged ratio of only 0.29 at Mtsensk compared to 1.42 for German tanks. 110, the 1st Guards Tank Brigade, under Colonel Kadukov, immediately advanced its left flank group at 09:45 hours. Within 17 minutes, Soviet armor penetration on the German right increased from 0.0 to 1.4 kilometers. 32 German crewmen from Panzer Regiment 35 surrendered after their vehicles were immobilized when they attempted to bypass T-34 positions and encountered KV-1s in ambush. This breakthrough enabled Soviet infantry to establish forward trenches on Hill 196, an objective, considered unreachable just 40 minutes earlier. Simultaneously, the 145th Artillery Regiment redirected two 122mm howitzers and four 76mm guns from anti-tank to counter-battery fire down the Orel-Tula road, supporting the advance. 100 General Guderian, at his forward headquarters near Kamyakovo, received confirmation of the tank armor crisis at 09:55 hours. He ordered an immediate halt to further panzer advances across a 3-kilometer section from Staroy Selo to the Zusha River. The revised plan called for artillery reinforcement and delayed assaults to bring up heavier anti-tank guns instead of continued direct tank engagement. This necessitated rerouting 6 supply convoys, reportedly delaying new ammunition and fuel deliveries by up to 8 hours. Simultaneously, Colonel von Oppeln-Bronikowski shifted his battalion reserve from the North Bank to reinforce the exposed southern axis. Radio message 14B-916, sent at 10:02 hours, instructed Kampfgruppkraft to dig in and brace for renewed Soviet attack. 100 by 10:10 hours, Soviet forces had pushed the German right flank back by 680 meters. The 4th Panzer Division was now an estimated 95 minutes behind its attack schedule. Soviet and German records indicate projected German tank losses had been 12, but reached 29 in the engagement, a 142% increase. This armor crisis forced postponement of Operation Typhoon's next phase by at least 24 hours. According to post-war Soviet analysis, the resistance at Mtsensk saved an estimated 400 Soviet personnel and delayed the German advance on Tula by 36 hours. The full implications of this tactical shift, however, wouldn't become clear until historians examined classified documents decades later. 100 documents recovered in 1991 from the Central Archive of the Russian Ministry of Defense revealed an unpublished field diary of Sergeant Alexei Markov, gunner in the 1st Guards Tank Brigade at Mtsensk. Markov wrote on October 6, 1941, "Our shells struck a German tank's turret. The enemy crew abandoned their machine in terror despite the engine running." This account contradicted the Soviet after-action report, which stated German tank crews fought to the last man in every case. The discrepancy arose due to wartime censorship, aiming to emphasize German determination. Researchers only accessed this diary after the Soviet archives opened in 1991. Supply records from the 1st Guards Tank Brigade's Logistics Regiment, logged October 5, 1941, show a severe ammunition shortfall. Instead of the authorized 110 rounds per T-34, only 53 shells per tank were available, a 52% deficit. Quartermaster Lieutenant Ivan Stepanenko reported this issue to Brigade Command, but rail traffic interruptions meant resupply was impossible in time for battle. This left Soviet tanks with just under half their planned firepower, restricting their ability to sustain prolonged engagement. The fire discipline exhibited at Mtsensk was a direct consequence of this logistical constraint. The official Red Army after-action report from October 8, 1941, claimed that only 12 Soviet tanks had been knocked out. However, captured German loss lists from the Bundesarchiv recorded October 9 noted 26 Soviet tanks visibly destroyed. Medical logs for the 1st Guards Tank Brigade confirmed only 15 tank crew casualties. Historian Dmitry Fursov's 2003 archival study traced this discrepancy to double-counting disabled tanks as total losses in the heat of combat. This recalculation revised Soviet loss rates at Mtsensk from 29% to roughly 16%, changing assessments of the battle's severity. While High Command debated flanking maneuvers, tankers at Hill 184 had a different struggle. Private Fyodor Anisimov of 2nd Company found his T-34 immobilized in mud. Using a felled telegraph pole and the crew's tow cable, he created a makeshift lever system, freeing the tank. Post-war interviews with 34 tankers documented similar improvisations. This pattern revealed that standard Red Army doctrine underestimated the terrain's impact on tracked vehicles. Despite repeated evidence, official doctrine remained unchanged until late 1942 due to bureaucratic inertia. Weather data from the Moscow Hydrometeorological Service for October 6, 1941, recorded 28 millimeters rainfall over 24 hours, with soil temperatures at 5 degrees Celsius and visibility reduced to 400 meters at dawn. Official battle plans assumed clearer conditions and firmer ground, but the rain increased ground pressure and caused German tanks, rated for 22 centimeters mud clearance, to bog down. Actual mud depth was measured at 30 centimeters, exceeding tank design parameters. This environmental mismatch wasn't fully acknowledged until post-war tank trials explained why German armor became immobilized so rapidly. Post-war analysis completed in 1948 by the Soviet General Staff concluded that the T-34's victory at Mtsensk was due to superior morale and tactical leadership. Marshal Rotmistrov's 1957 memoir, Steel Tracks, argued that the Soviet crew's discipline and courage overcame technical shortcomings. The official Soviet military history, published in 1961, credited the Red Army's organizational skill and claimed T-34 superiority without quantifying technological factors, estimating German tank losses at 60 and minimal Soviet losses. This interpretation persisted for 2 decades, shaped by classified archives, propaganda priorities, and Western historians' lack of access to Soviet primary sources. Early Western research, like Little Heart studies, relied on German officer accounts, further distorting the narrative. Declassification of German war diaries and operational records from the Bundesarchiv in 1978 altered this view. Historian Stephen Zaloga's 1984 re-examination of German and Soviet archives uncovered technical evidence contradicting earlier accounts. Zaloga's research found that Soviet logistical shortages and terrain adaptation played a central role, not just morale. Diaries from Panzer Regiment 35 indicated that only 29 operational tanks remained by noon, not the 43 claimed earlier. In comparison, during the May 1940 Battle of Stan, German armor faced different ground conditions, enabling an 86% mobility rate, while at Mtsensk, mobility dropped below 60% due to mud. The contrasting outcome Stan's German advance versus Mtsensk's halt were shaped mainly by environmental and technical, not just doctrinal, factors. Research published in 2022 by the Russian State Military Archive, using digital cross-tabulation, estimated actual Soviet tank losses at 17 and German losses at 31 during the Mtsensk engagement, a 26% upward revision for Soviet losses, and a 48% revision for Germans over prior Soviet publications. Zaloga, Fursov, and Duffy contend that improper Soviet loss reporting inflated perceptions of a one-sided victory, while Russian analyst Petrov maintains German mechanical breakdowns were central. The mainstream position, supported by parallel analysis of crew logs and battlefield maps, now credits both Soviet technical design and German misjudgment of terrain. The debate focuses on how much tank design versus operational context shaped the outcome at Mtsensk, offering insight into the role of battlefield adaptation in mechanized warfare. Senior Sergeant Vasily Andreevich Kislev, commander of T-34 No. 301, 1st Platoon, age 27, from Kursk region, was positioned north of the Orel-Tula Road at dawn on October 6, 1941. Before the war, Kislev was a schoolteacher who volunteered after his village was bombed. At 0840 hours, with his tank isolated and under heavy German fire, Kislev decided whether to withdraw or attempt to rescue a disabled KV-1. In a 1965 interview archived at the Russian State Military Archive, he recalled, "The radio cried for help. Leaving meant safety, staying meant comrades saved or lost." Kislev advanced, covering the damaged KV-1 and allowing its crew to escape, saving 5 men. He suffered shrapnel wounds and returned to teaching after the war. Interviewed again in 1981 at age 67, he reflected, "In battle, loyalty is the only compass." He died in 1987 in Kursk. His memoir is archived in Moscow's Central Museum of the Great Patriotic War. Feldwebel Otto Striegler, 4th Panzer Division, experienced the same engagement from the German side. Captured by Soviet forces after his Panzer III was immobilized in mud southeast of Hill 184, his October 10, 1941, interrogation revealed their crews did not understand why our guns failed against the Russian tanks. Striegler stated, "We aimed, we fired nothing. The Soviets kept moving." After the war, Striegler returned to Thuringia, East Germany, and in 1962 met a former Soviet tanker at a veterans event. His account agreed on the impact of mud, but differed regarding the role of close infantry support. Sofia Frolova, a civilian nurse attached to the 145th Artillery Regiment, was caught in the confusion of artillery exchanges near Hill 196. Frolova helped evacuate wounded tankers from burning vehicles. Her post-war medical records document a diagnosis of shell shock in 1942, treated at a Moscow clinic with then experimental therapies. She was one of approximately 19% of Soviet frontline medical workers diagnosed with psychological trauma. By 1950, she had recovered and led local Red Cross chapters. Frolova's testimony informed later Soviet commemorations of battlefield medical service and influenced post-war Red Army psychological support policy. These individual experiences, when examined across hundreds of documented cases, revealed patterns that directly influenced subsequent Soviet tactical doctrine and medical policy. Within 15 minutes of the Soviet breakthrough, at 0945 hours, German right flank positions collapsed. General Heinz Guderian, stationed at his Kamyakovo headquarters, received after-action reports by 0955 hours confirming the crisis in Panzer operations. He ordered an immediate halt. All advancing units along a 3-kilometer line from Staroy Selo to the Zusha River were to dig in and await artillery reinforcement. This pause impacted 4,500 Wehrmacht troops across the Orel-Tula axis. The 1st Guards Tank Brigade, coordinated by Colonel Kadukov, redirected its main weight from Hill 184 toward Hill 196, stretching their advance by 1.4 kilometers. Ammunition and fuel reserves, originally staged for supporting a westward move, were now diverted south on 6 supply convoys. By 10:10 hours, the German right flank had been forced back by 680 meters, with effective Panzer strength declining from 43 to 29 operational tanks. Within 3 days, German operational plans for Operation Typhoon were forced into re-evaluation. The next major armored thrust against Tula, originally scheduled for October 8, was delayed by at least 48 hours due to the incapacitation of 83 vehicles along the Mtsensk line. General Guderian revised assault doctrine. 3 batteries of 7.5 centimeters pack 40 anti-tank guns, available only after emergency road clearance, were diverted from scheduled defensive deployment at Orel. This reallocation deprived rear areas of anti-tank protection and resulted in a 10% reduction of mobile reserves elsewhere on the Bryansk front. German casualty forecasts, once projected at 60 for this phase, swelled to over 90 within the WWII 50% increase, directly tied to unscheduled Soviet counterattacks. Munitions consumption also shifted. Daily 50 mm AP shell use climbed from 900 to 1,350, a 42% surge fueled by ineffective fire against T-34 armor. By November 29, 1941, the campaign's trajectory bore out these operational shocks. Tula remained under Soviet control, with the city's defenses reinforced nearly 3 weeks ahead of original projections, permitting the establishment of 3 defensive rings around Moscow. The Orel-Tula rail line, once assumed vulnerable to German assault until mid-November, instead functioned unimpeded through late December, enabling the transfer of 30,000 Soviet troops and 200 artillery pieces to the Moscow sector. Front-level command changes ensued. Colonel Kadukov was promoted to Major General on December 17 for his role at Mtsensk, while General Guderian was relieved from Army Group Center Command in December 1941. 56 Soviet officers received commendations for action during the engagement. Doctrinal shifts followed. By January 1942, the Red Army officially adopted dispersed defense and rapid countermaneuver as standard tank brigade tactics across 10 tank brigades. The timeframe of the German winter offensive shifted by nearly 3 weeks. Operations originally slated for mid to late November, including the renewed push on Moscow, were postponed to early December, disrupting the balance of offensive opportunities before the severe Russian winter. Territorial calculations revealed that over 260 square kilometers of the Orel-Tula corridor remained under Red Army control by December 1, compared to pre-battle projections of mid-November occupation by Panzer forces. The Soviet High Command reallocated 2 full tank divisions, released from the defense of Tula by December 12, to reinforce Kalinin front, directly supporting the December counteroffensive. At the theater scale, German planners expected Tula besieged by November 10. In reality, it stood secure, and German divisions found themselves overextended and strategically isolated by mid-December 1941. These operational shifts informed strategic decisions at the highest levels of command throughout the winter campaign of 1941-42. Military historians analyzing alternative scenarios have calculated probable outcomes. If the Soviet defensive breakthrough at Mtsensk on October 6, 1941, had not occurred, the Allied timetable for the Moscow counteroffensive would have been critically compromised. Operation Uranus, the wider Soviet encirclement effort, could not have commenced before January 1942, approximately 6 weeks later than the actual November start. This lag arises from supply and reinforcement nodes at Tula being lost to advancing Panzer forces, as corroborated by German logs showing necessary transit times for artillery and fuel shipments. Casualty projections reflect the significance of the event. In his 2003 analysis, Dmitry Fursov estimated that, absent the Soviet stand at Mtsensk, an additional 5,200 to 8,000 Soviet casualties would have resulted from a forced withdrawal to Kashira. As tactical reserves and fixed artillery, they were unprepared for rapid German advance. Territorial calculations by Stephen Zaloga, 1984, found that the Orel-Tula axis would have remained under German control until at least mid-December, representing a delay of 3 to 5 weeks versus actual timelines. This projection is grounded in evidence from troop movement registers and German engineering reports on infrastructure repair rates. Strategically, the Wehrmacht could have kept the option of a pincer encirclement maneuver against Moscow until late November, threatening the stability of Soviet defensive planning on two fronts. Comparing the Mtsensk encounter to other Eastern Front engagements provides further context. At Mtsensk, 4,500 troops, a 21-kilometer sector, 84 hours, and the retention of 260 square kilometers by Soviet forces. At the Battle of Stan, May 1940, 4,000 troops, 9-kilometer sector, 3 days, resulting in German advance and French defeat. At Brody Dubno, June 1941, 15,000 troops, 70-kilometer sector, 5 days with massive Soviet tank losses. Military staff colleges at Frunze Academy, Russia, and Bundeswehr Staff College, Germany, examine Mtsensk alongside Stan and Dubno to illustrate principles of armored engagement and terrain adaptation. Of 124 armored operations on the Central Front in 1941, Mtsensk directly influenced 18% of subsequent operational redeployments, compared to Stan's 7% effect on overall engagements in France. Zaloga's 1984 analysis ranked Mtsensk third among 11 decisive Eastern Front moments, based on modifications to doctrine, timeline shifts, and scale of casualties. The dominant academic assessment views Mtsensk as pivotal in shaping armored combat doctrine. Zaloga and Fursov find, based on cross-archival analysis, that the technical features of the T-34, coupled with terrain and logistical adaptation, explain both Soviet durability and German failure. British historian David Glantz contends that earlier Western interpretations overstated technical advantages, but primary crew logs and Soviet declassified documents reveal the convergence of environmental, technical, and doctrinal factors. The primary debate concerns the weight of tank design versus command adaptation. Declassified German planning memos from November 1941 finally confirmed the scale of loss and the revision of operational priorities. The consensus: Mtsensk was instrumental, with measurable consequences for the battle for Moscow, delaying German operations by nearly 3 weeks, mitigating casualties by several thousand, and altering the strategic equation for both sides. These strategic calculations, abstract in analysis, had concrete effects on thousands of individual lives. Senior Sergeant Vasily Andreevich Kislev, commander of T-34 No. 301 from the 1st Guards Tank Brigade, resumed his civilian role as a schoolteacher in Kursk after the war. Over 4 decades, he dedicated himself to teaching and to commemorating his fellow tank crews, organizing annual remembrance meetings from 1946 until his death. In a 1965 oral history interview at the Russian State Military Archive, Kislev stated, "The T-34 was our shield, but it was the will of those inside that held the line." He maintained close ties with 73 veterans, contributing his written memoir and photographs to the Central Museum of the Great Patriotic War. Kislev died in 1987, aged 73, in Kursk. At the battlefield site near Mtsensk, the T-34 Heroes Memorial Park was inaugurated on October 6, 1971, the 30th anniversary of the engagement. The memorial features a preserved T-34 tank on a concrete plinth, encircled by engraved stones listing the names of 80 crew and officers. Commemorative ceremonies on October 6 draw approximately 4,000